Every now and then, biology happens to make it into the public eye in a very political way. Unfortunately, in almost every case, it's about someone who doesn't understand biology, who's trying to change public laws or education materials so as to formalize their ignorance of biology into some kind of standard that other people have to abide by. A recent incident in Arizona is perhaps the most modern example. Diane Douglas is the state superintendent of the Arizona Department of Education, and in May of 2018, she proposed some amendments to the education standards that would have greatly diminished evolution as a concept, and downplayed the evidence that supports it. The changes would have delegitimized the scientific process, and misconstrued how theories and experiments work. Now, Diane Douglas was not the only person to write these changes. She had a whole group of people who were equally ignorant of biology who helped her write this stuff. And they went so far as to delete the word evolution itself in as many sentences as they could find. The extent of all of these changes was dramatic and unprecedented. Lesson plans that had been carefully constructed by hundreds of educators over a long period of time were now under threat of being steamrolled and changed overnight. The whole thing was a scandal that ultimately led to at least one professional resignation. Lacey Weiser, who at the time was the director of the K-12 science education programs. At the time that this was all going on, Glenn Branch, the deputy director for the National Center for Science Education, was quoted as saying, "The revisions are aimed deliberately at softening the treatment of evolution, and thus misleading teachers and students about the scientific standing of evolution. These are very bad revisions that were made. They clearly weren't endorsed by the writing committee, and it's somewhat disrespectful to them to make these changes." Unquote. The situation then was pretty terrible, but now, 5 months later, the tables have turned. When it came time to vote on the plans, to vote on all of these changes to the school materials, Diane Douglas made her motion to implement the changes, but she was met with silence. No one seconded her motion, and subsequently it crashed and burned. Now that's good, but even better, in response to Mrs. Douglas's proposed changes, there was a huge public outcry. All kinds of organizations, like science advocacy groups and education groups, they all criticized the superintendent, and they made damning criticisms of her changes. And these groups included the National Center for Science Education, the Arizona Science Teachers Association, and the Secular Coalition for Arizona. Because of the public outcry, a new draft was created that emphasized the validity of science, and the validity of evolution as a scientific theory. The final vote was 6-4 in favor of passing the scientifically accurate revisions. Science and fact have prevailed over indoctrination and religious dogma that interferes with the education of children. Zenato Quintana, the president of the Secular Coalition for Arizona, said, quote, "We've been very concerned about Diane Douglas's efforts to push her religious views on more than 1 million kids in Arizona's public schools. Our students deserve to be taught science in their science classes, and to be free from religious indoctrination at school. The State Board of Education made the right decision in adopting science standards approved by highly qualified science teachers." Unquote. And then you had the National Center for Science Education, which made a public statement saying, quote, "This is a tremendous victory for Arizona science education. Only with a scientifically accurate and pedagogically appropriate treatment of evolution and climate change in their state science standards and in their textbooks and classrooms will Arizona's public school students be adequately prepared to meet the challenges of the 21st century." Unquote. And that's really what's important here. We live in a world where huge segments of our economy and massively important sectors of our civilization are all about biochemistry and biology and healthcare. We cannot truly understand these sciences if we reject the fundamental theory that they're based on. And in a world where we're competing with other modern countries, we cannot afford to miseducate generations of children with goofy religious nonsense and science denialism.